Story 1. If you wanted to hang out with friends, you had to walk to their house, knock on the door, and ask their parents if they could come out to play. Sometimes the answer was he's having his dinner or just no, and then you would casually walk home or move on to another friend. Now, if you just showed up at a friend's house and did that, they would consider it fairly impolite. Story 2. When the truck came around spraying a pesticide fog to fight the mosquitoes, we followed it, dancing in the mist. This probably explains why I have cancer now. Story 3. I recently realized that children no longer get chickenpox. It's strange to me that it has seemingly disappeared in such a short period, especially since there are children's books and cartoon episodes where characters still contract it. This highly infectious rash used to be a common occurrence, and most people would only get it once. It felt inevitable, and everyone seemed to anticipate it as a rite of passage. Now, it has suddenly become non-existent. Story 4. I was babysitting other children at the age of 12. Sometimes I was at their house until midnight or later, waiting for their parents to return home. Story 5. There were times during the summer when I was not allowed in the house. I would get up, watch cartoons, and eat cereal. Then I was told to go outside and play. If I didn't have anyone to play with, I would ride my bike for miles. There was a convenience store about 4 miles away from my childhood home. It was not uncommon for me to ride my bike alone to get a slushy drink. My mom had no idea where I was, who I was with, or whether I was safe. I wasn't allowed back in the house until lunchtime. After lunch, it was back outside until the streetlights came on. I built forts in the woods, explored houses in subdivisions being built, crawled into sewers, built skateboard ramps out of scrap wood, and hung out with kids in other neighborhoods I had never met. We used wood-burning kits, had BB gun wars, and did all sorts of things that should have been supervised by adults. Nowadays, kids seem to be constantly tracked, and parents want to know where they are at all times. Story 6. Getting disconnected from the internet because someone needed to use the landline was frustrating. My mom would always yell that she needed to make a call in the middle of my conversations. The sound of dial-up still haunts me. Story 7. Having to rewind the VHS tape after watching a movie, so you watch the entire movie again very quickly but backward. Story 8. Party line landlines required you to wait for the stranger sharing your phone line to finish their call before you could make your own call. Story 9. During the summer between 5th and 6th grade, my friends and I had our own factory, just like Bart and Milhouse. We had a patch of woods near the train tracks and above the old auxiliary line that ran to an abandoned warehouse. We would camp there on weekends and tell others we were at a friend's house. We spray painted, had small bonfires, and eventually pried open the basement door to explore a half-submerged dungeon. Story 10. Some kindergartners didn't have anyone at home when they returned from school. These children wore their house key on a string around their neck and were referred to as key kids. Story 11. A significant amount of the bullying depicted in television and movies has occurred on occasion. While it may not be extremely outrageous, it is still painful. Story 12. I remember watching my 2 younger siblings after school until our parents got home from work. I was 10 years old, and the idea of parentification did not exist. No one complained about doing chores around the house either. It was just normal life, and growing up with responsibilities did not harm anyone. Story 13. Being able to buy cigarettes at the age of 16 is legal. Additionally, some individuals may use a note from a friend's mother claiming the cigarettes are hers, or they may purchase single cigarettes for 40 pence each from the shopkeeper. Story 14. I walked to school alone starting in 1st grade. The route included a busy 4-lane street without a sidewalk. One of my neighbors yelled at me for walking on his lawn, so I walked in the street or balanced on the curb while drivers honked at me. Story 15. If you took a picture, you had to wait until you had taken 12 or 36 pictures first. Then you had to take them to a store and pay a significant amount. After that, you had to wait 2 weeks to see if the images turned out well or if they were blurry or if your thumb was in the frame. This was a common experience. Story 16. To get home from high school, I had to ride a bus for 30 minutes. At that point, I could choose to either get off the bus and walk over a mile along a busy state route to my house or ride the bus back to the elementary school and then back to my house with a bus full of children. which added another 40 minutes. I had to do this every day of high school, including my last day as a senior. Only the wealthy students had cars, unlike today. Story 17. Once you got home from school, it was a relief. Unless you had some homework, the drama from school stayed there. Of course, if you had difficult parents, that was a different matter. Story 18. MP. Yes. In those days, we would have been glad to have the price of a cup of tea. GC. A cup of cold tea. Yai, without milk or sugar. TG or tea. Story 19. I had to stay after school to practice my cursive writing because the teacher thought it was horrible. I had to walk back and forth to school by myself. Story 20. Being left to watch ourselves after school from first grade onward. Biking up to and including 5 miles around our house, as long as we were back by dinner. Parents not knowing at all where their kids were from the time school ended until dinner. Story 21. Being told to get out of my house and not come back until the street lights come on. We used to roam those streets. Story 22. I'm sure many are discussing the technological advancements of the millennial generation, so I will take a step back to my parents' experience with party lines. Multiple individuals in the neighborhood or city shared the same phone line, allowing anyone to listen in. If someone else wanted to use the line, you had to hang up to give them access. Story 23. Handwriting letters to communicate brings immense joy, especially when running to check the mail and receiving responses. Story 24. It used to take an hour to download one song on Napster, and if there was any interruption in the broadband, the song would end abruptly. However, you would still add it to your playlist. I still hear songs today, and my brain notes the exact moment they would cut off on my old playlist. Story 25. When I was in grades 5 to 7, it was really cool to have my own personal landline phone in my room. I placed it on my computer desk and would talk to my friends while exploring the internet of the 2000s. The internet used to be more chaotic and hostile than it is today. Story 26. My adult children today can't believe half the things about my childhood. We had so many adventures, took things that didn't belong to us, got into countless accidents, and almost faced death numerous times. They've never even been to the emergency room once in their entire lives. Story 27. The lack of screens and internet access was significant. There were no phones, tablets, or laptops. The internet, as we know it today, simply did not exist. Feeling bored? Go outside or read a book. Want to listen to music? Insert a CD into your portable CD player. Watching a movie meant using a VHS tape or going to the theater. Story 28. Disappeared for hours and days on end in summertime, told to be home by dark. Absolutely wild freedom and bicycles to go anywhere. Story 29. I had to share a landline phone with my entire family. I still remember my crush calling and my little sister picking up the other phone to listen in. It was the most awkward conversation of my life, and I couldn't even text him to explain later. Story 30. At age 5, 2 regular places we played were on the train track and at the construction site across from our house, which had no bathroom or running hot water, and the toilet was carved into the mountain outside. We used newspaper to wipe ourselves. Story 31. One of my high schools had a smoking terrace that students could use outside between the library and the cafeteria. Students could bring firearms to school for bird hunting after classes, but they had to check in with the office first and leave them unloaded in their vehicles. Students would face consequences if the police conducted searches, which they did regularly for drugs and firearms, and found a weapon that hadn't been checked in with the office or was loaded. Story 32. We used to carry our music on small shiny discs that stored only one album each. We had a special device to take photos, and depending on the type, you couldn't see them immediately. You had to pay someone to perform chemical processing to view the images. You couldn't talk to your friends anytime and anywhere you went. You had to buy small coin-like tokens and use a strange device mounted on poles across the city called a payphone, or go into a shop to ask if you could use one and hope they would allow it. You also had to remember their phone numbers, as texting was not an option. If you had a mobile phone, it had buttons for numbers, and typing letters required multiple presses of the same key, making it tedious. Additionally, you had to limit your usage since you were charged for every text and phone call made. If you wanted someone's or a business's phone number, you relied on thick directories distributed to every household each semester. To access the internet, you had to visit a shop that charged you by the minute to use one of their computers, which were often large, boxy, and not always directly connected to the internet. If you had a computer at home and wanted to communicate with someone online, you had to wait until they were also at home and using their computer. Story 33. Grandpa sent me on my bike to the corner store 2 miles away when I was 8 years old to buy him beer and cigarettes. Story 34. The massive burden of a computer I created after spending 28 days and nights downloading enough music for 3 burned CDs. Story 35. We would spend the entire day on our bikes, and our parents had no idea where we were until we returned home after dark. I spoke to my mom about this when I was an adult and told her where we had gone, and she had no idea. It was a couple of miles away in another suburb at a friend's cousin's house, and we played baseball there. Story 36. When I was 7 years old, I stepped on a large rusty nail that left a serious hole in my heel. I didn't go home because I was afraid my parents wouldn't let me go out again, so I put grass in my shoe. Story 37. I spent hours wandering around my neighborhood, usually alone but sometimes with my siblings, without any adult supervision. I often walked or biked miles from home without a mobile phone, and my parents didn't mind as long as I was home by dinner time. This started in elementary school and continued through high school. Story 38. It was considered unusual for people to install cameras on their houses in the early 2000s. Many wondered what reasons they had to feel afraid. Additionally, children often engaged in more mischief. Now, it is generally assumed that we are being recorded wherever we go. Story 39. Binge-watching shows did not exist. The networks decided which episodes would be available at one time. If you were out at 5:30 and that was the time slot for your favorite show, you simply missed it. Story 40. Is bringing a signed note from home still common for going home with a friend or to excuse an absence? Or do parents just email the teacher to handle that? Story 41. 4th to 6th grade, late 1970s. Walked 3/4 of a mile to school in the morning, alone. At lunch, walked 3/4 of a mile home, alone. Made lunch at home in the empty house. Walked back to school alone for the afternoon. Walked home alone around 4. Sat in the empty house waiting for parents who usually returned around 5. Muhammad Ali, though admired for his anti-war stance, was often seen as a joke and a loudmouth. Many people actively rooted for him to lose every time he fought so he would just go away. O.J. Simpson was revered, probably more by white individuals than black Americans. Betty White was considered an annoying old has-been playing a supporting role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Both The Twilight Zone and I Love Lucy were seen as extreme desperation reruns you watched when nothing good was on. Something that older people liked because they were comfortable with formulaic television. People born after 1980 really underestimate the role that the perspective of time and the documentary When We Were Kings played in Muhammad Ali's rehabilitation in the public mind. It's a lot less charming when a loudmouth is boasting about how great he is in real time, and I say this as someone who thinks Ali is a great man for his refusal to serve in Vietnam. Story 42. When I was 13, my best friend's parents were transferred to Mexico City. That summer, my parents flew me out to visit him for 2 weeks. I was not declared an unaccompanied minor. I was just a guy with a plane ticket. At that time, my parents and my friend were with me at the gate. However, when it came to the layover in Dallas, I was on my own. I arrived in Mexico without any issues. However, my flight leaving Mexico landed in Dallas late. I ran through customs, got stopped and questioned, and almost missed my connecting flight. They held the flight for me and 2 other passengers. Had I missed my flight, I would have been a 13-year-old stuck in Texas by myself. Now that I am 40, I still question my parents about what they were thinking. Story 43. It was perfectly legal for me to be drunk in high school. The drinking age was lowered to 18, and for a brief period, I took full advantage. Story 44. Nothing wireless. Except if your family had enough money for a television with a remote control. As kids, we were the remote control. There was also the expectation that you wouldn't be inside all day during summer vacation. That was a time to completely disappear and not be home until dinner time. Story 45. At the age of 12, I rode my bike across the United States border from Canada to fish in a small creek. I also used to climb a nearby mountain, over a mile from home and a mile up the mountain on my own. I navigated game trails and was fully immersed in the wilderness, encountering bears and coyotes. We even had a bear shot in the creek near my house. Story 46. The answer to, I'm going out to play with my friend 15 minutes from here, when I was 10 was, okay, come back before dinner, and not unless I drive you there. Story 47. You don't want to know. In my time, there was no television, not even black and white. There was no school lunch, no recess. Books had to be shared, and there weren't enough textbooks for everyone. School wasn't free. Children had to do chores to clean up the classroom, and there was a lot more. It was a classic developing country. Story 48. I went outside and played until my parents called me in for dinner. For the record, I am not a boomer. My childhood years were in a suburban part of a northern town in England during the 2000s. My parents still live in the same area, and compared to 10 or 15 years ago, kids are not playing outside as much as we used to when I was younger, and I am now in my late 20s. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.